red button.
Yes.
So the record, oh, thank goodness for that. So, and Gosha, you must keep your machine on after Yevgenia. Hello, nice to meet you. We're just about starting, so it's good to have you with us. I will share a PowerPoint screen when I find it, just to introduce, and I'll introduce myself and then introduce our speaker, Samir. No. That's it. So can you see a blank screen now?
Yeah, we can.
Good. Welcome to the 12th, amazingly, the 12th seminar in this online seminar series from the International Society for Research on Solitude. I'll say a little bit about the ISRS, the society, before going on. It's a society run by myself, Julian Stern, and Gosha Vaweko, and I'm from Lincoln Bishop University, recently renamed, used to be Bishop Grosseteste University, and Gosha's from the University of Szczecin. And we worked together on this over many years, but we're up to seminar 12. Oh, and I forgot to change my university's name. It's only a couple of months that we have got a new name, and I will get a fine for using the old name, I suspect. I will have to put some money in a swear jar for failing to change the name. I've got it at the bottom of the screen. I'm the president of the ISRS, and Margarita Gosha is the vice president of the ISRS, in charge therefore of all the vice in the organization. And we will be introducing Samir Dayal from Bentley University, and I will introduce him a little more detail, talking about, or a short version of your title, Beyond Self-Help Solitude on Choosing Loneliness. I wanted to mention the International Society because it has many things going on. It has a series of these seminars, and these seminars are also available online afterwards. So you can look at the previous 11 seminars and see what has gone on before. And both the seminars and the discussion as part of the seminar is both of those are available online. We also have an email address and a website where all this information is held. We also have a book series, Bloomsbury Solitude Studies. If anyone wants to write a book related to solitude, silence, loneliness from any discipline, there is information for it on the Bloomsbury website and on our ISRS website. I'm one of the series editors with Dat Bauer in Australia, Axel Seaman in America, and Gosha in Poland. We have published one book already, the Bloomsbury Handbook of Solitude, Silence and Loneliness, before we set up the series. We have published 2 more books, including my own book on the art, literature and music of solitude, a topic that will be is related to Samir Dayal's talk today. And we've already published Sandra Basacci's Solitude, Silence and Loneliness in Adolescence, a teen who stands alone. And Sandra, I'm an educationist with some other disciplines. Sandra is a psychologist. But today we have Samir Dayal. Samir works at Bentley University in Massachusetts, working in the Department of English and Media Studies, working on world literatures, and also working as a board member of the Society for the Psychological Study of the Arts, a wonderful spread of interest. Excuse me. And Samir is going to be talking about many things, centering on, in literature particularly, how one might choose loneliness. This seems to be an oxymoron, choosing loneliness, because loneliness is a form of suffering. But why might people do that? So I will end with a blank slide, and I will stop sharing my screen so that I can give the screen up to Samir, who will talk for perhaps 35 minutes, leaving another discussion. The seminar will definitely finish within 90 minutes, but the discussion is what will drive the second half of the seminar. So I am myself looking forward to this, having studied aspects of the art, literature, music of Solitude. I'm looking forward immensely to Samir. Samir is immensely knowledgeable, as you will find out, and is going to tell us something about this. So Samir, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. Before I begin, since you're correcting the name of your university, may I also request that you correct my name to Dayal. So there are two A's in my name.
Oh, I am so sorry. That's my
just
goodness.
fine. It's a strange name, and if you have time, correct that as well as the name of your university.
And I have spelt it correctly in the past. So many apologies.
No. I want to say good morning and or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are at this time. I thank you for being here, and that too on a Friday. I want to express first my gratitude to Julian for his very kind invitation to present a talk to you. But then Julian is kind in his every word and deed, as all of you know very well. I also want to thank Gasha and Rafa and other colleagues at the International Society for Research on Solitude. I am honored and grateful. My talk today, Island Consciousness and Chosen Loneliness, Islandness as Collective Withdrawal, explores how the concept of islandness can serve as a collective act of refusal in the face of techno-capitalist extraction. And I'll say more about this in the following slides. It is still a bit of a rough draft, and I hope you won't mind my trying out these ideas on you who are all experts in the field of loneliness studies, or at least solitude studies. The images on this slide, on the left, Makatea Island in French Polynesia, and Richard Powers' 2024 novel Playground on the right, introduce two key images for my talk. One is literal and geographic, and the other is literary. And it is towards these two images which I would like to direct your attention in order to highlight a somewhat paradoxical idea, namely chosen loneliness. The guiding question for me here is, what might it mean to choose loneliness, not as isolation, but as a shared ethical stance? This talk draws from an ongoing book project on that paradoxical subject. The title of my book in progress is tentatively Choosing Loneliness, Literary Representations of Alienation, Disaffection, and Withdrawal. The received wisdom is that loneliness is the perception of being excluded from belonging, from community, and unwanted isolation. A quote, discrepancy between desired and achieved levels of social contact, as literature Anne Peplow and Daniel Perlman put it. The most recent WHO report on loneliness 2025, as Julian kindly reminded me, states that, quote, loneliness is considered to be involuntary and undesired, unquote. In my book project, as in this talk, I acknowledge the pain of this undesired, unchosen loneliness. Yet it is precisely the monumental fact of the pain that might provoke us to explore the affordances of various forms of disconnection, and particularly what also might be gained in choosing loneliness. So what you see on this slide is a very sketchy attempt, and I know it's hard to see. It's a very sketchy attempt to divide what might be called negative and positive analogues of loneliness. Thus, on the left, the negative side, you have terms adjacent to, but not identical with loneliness. Bad alienation, as in Marx, melancholy, as in Giorgio Agamben, bad negativity, incel status, and one of my chapters deals with this idea of involuntarily chosen uh, celibacy, rejection, ostracism, atomization, acedia, depression, desubjectivation, loss of world, and so on. So these are all negative forms of loneliness, and I acknowledge them. I acknowledge the pain that they cause in a lot of people, to the level of suicidality. A lot of people have pointed out that suicide levels, at least in the US, are very high, especially among girls. So it's a serious problem. But on the right, on the positive side, you have other terms adjacent to loneliness, which are also of interest to me, including not only disaffection, but diaspora, negation of negation, as in Hegel, solitude, solitariness, but also the terms my project focuses on, chosen loneliness, elective self-alienation, and in this instance, island consciousness or islandness. And I just want to note that there's a whole field or subfield of island studies, not just focus on geography, but also on the metaphor that island consciousness it indicates. My point is to say that choosing loneliness is inevitably an imprecise phrase because loneliness is not a precisely delimited category. I want to suggest that loneliness is not to be defined narrowly or too quickly assimilated into such adjacent categories, but many of them play a role in my exploration at various points and in different contexts. Earlier chapters of my book offered explorations of a wide variety of forms of chosen loneliness in selected texts, ranging from Sophocles' Antigone to Herman Melville's Bartleby the Scrivener, alongside Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis and Samuel Beckett's Molloy. Among other works, I discuss David Henry Wong's M. Butterfly alongside Tony Tulathimut's Rejection. I also discuss Nobel laureate Han Kang's The Vegetarian and Otessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. In many of these works in the earlier chapters, we encounter loneliness as multifaceted but individual self-alienation, the refusal to comply, the ethical withdrawal from unjust social orders or systems, among other modes of withdrawal. But these are, as I say, solitary gestures, and I anticipate that they could invite objections and important critiques of my approach, which in this talk I seek to reframe and accommodate. So I'm hoping that this will become part of my concluding chapter. As in the earlier chapters, I also ask broader philosophical and aesthetic questions such as, what if withdrawal could be collectively chosen? An organized refusal to participate in extractive or exploitative structures. So this slide tracks a transition that I'm trying to make from individual to collective, from the analysis of complex and complicated variations on individual withdrawal or self-alienation to community-level collective disengagement. The question I'm asking is not whether loneliness can be justified, if such a question even makes sense across the board, but rather under what conditions does withdrawal, which in my project is one variant of chosen loneliness, become an act of solidarity instead of abandonment? How can it be strategic, ethical process or mode of being responsible to the environment and perhaps instrumental in building a better world? In my conclusion, I will reiterate this important dimension of process. So it's very important for my approach here. With that in mind, I propose to look at three dominant models of withdrawal that circulate in our cultural imagination. The idea of choosing loneliness is perhaps vulnerable to criticism. For instance, the criticism that such a choice bespeaks privilege, like elitist retreat from social responsibility, rather than posing true resistance to bourgeois capitalist normativity. One of my purposes, therefore, is to try to anticipate and accommodate or respond to the possible objections to the focus on choosing loneliness and analogous dispositions. The criticisms or critiques I'm trying to anticipate fall into four broad categories: elitist privilege, social irresponsibility, fashionable individualism, and antisocial escapism. Each of these casts doubt on the suggestion that withdrawal might be worthy of being taken seriously, or might have ethical or political weight, as I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that choosing loneliness does have affordances and may be ethically responsible. I want to anticipate these critiques by exploring whether, in some instances, strategic collective withdrawal, not isolation, but responsibility, to adapt Donna Haraway's term, she's an environmentalist, as you know, might offer a different model of engagement that can respond to such critiques and promote what Hegel conceptualized as ethical community, or Sittlichkeit, but not as exclusive or closed community. Hegel has been criticized for that, but I want to suggest that it can be an open process. So my book reframes the strategy of withdrawal, moving from the individual to the collective. The philosophical reframing that I'm offering suggests that in some circumstances, communal withdrawal can paradoxically promote ethical community, Hegel's model of Sittlichkeit. So here my main text is to explore such strategic withdrawal will be Richard Power's Playground, which I've already mentioned, because it highlights the perhaps paradoxical question: can withdrawal be communal, even community building? The three recognizable patterns of withdrawal I want to discuss are the following. First, therapeutic withdrawal, which I'm assimilating to neoliberal self-optimization. This self-help model of optimization and personal wellness, identified in some cases with neoliberal self-optimization, is allied with a second, curated solitude, the elite retreat that depends on leisure, education, and access to nature, not to mention just material wealth. The third model that I will consider is what I'm calling here island consciousness, a collective, place-based withdrawal, strategically choosing loneliness as an ongoing process of engagement which nurtures and maintains relationships of care and accountability. This framework counterposes Mark Fisher's discussion in Capitalist Realism, where he argues that there is no real alternative visible to capitalist realism, against Donna Haraway's responsibility, that is, staying with the trouble, as she puts it, rather than acquiescing to neoliberal or capitalist logic, or fleeing responsibility to other beings and to life. So Donna Haraway basically is arguing that we should be allying with all life forms and not seeking isolation or loneliness in that bad sense. So I'd like to look briefly at these models in sequence, beginning with the therapeutic withdrawal that dominates much of popular culture. And for the sake of illustration, I offer two fairly well-known texts as representative examples of a wider cultural problematic that is open to criticism. As I say, I'm trying to anticipate and accommodate this criticism of my own project on choosing loneliness. Model one, the self-help genre, tells us that happiness lies in managing our attention, our time, and our emotional investments, largely for the sake of individual optimization of life. Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, for instance, I hope you'll forgive the French, but it's in the title, frames care as a finite resource, something to invest strategically. And some of the phrases that I have selected from Manson's book represent Manson's discourse to give you a flavor of his language. So, for example, he says, you have a limited amount of fucks to give, very few in fact. Treat emotional investments like portfolio management. Give fewer fucks strategically to maximize returns. Victimhood chic is in style, he says, on both the right and the left today. And he concludes that not giving a fuck does not mean being indifferent. It means being comfortable with being different. This is a worldview of emotional portfolio management, where the goal is efficiency and minimal inconvenience to oneself. Thinkers such as Byung-Chul Han have described this as a hallmark of the achievement society, as he calls it, a society that replaces critique with self-optimization. What results is not meaningful self-optimization or resistance, despite the tenor of Manson's title, but the simulation or simulacrum of resistance, a feeling of opposition that leaves the structure, the status quo, intact, uninterrupted, unexamined. So I want to acknowledge that such a model of therapeutic withdrawal may well warrant the critique of elitism. And for that reason, I highlight it as a questionable form of choosing self-alienation or loneliness or withdrawal. First of all, it embodies a purely individualistic logic, individual solutions to systemic problems. Second, it emerges from class privilege. It assumes the capacity to choose one's engagements. Third, it re-entrenches a neoliberal framework. It reduces social relationships to market calculations. So I'd like to turn next to a second related but more sophisticated version of this logic, what I'm calling the model of curated solitude. Under Model 2, curated solitude, my example is Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing. It proposes a mindful retreat from the attention economy, this is her phrase, a step away from productivity culture. Her call to refuse productivity is an important critique of market capitalism, yet it often depends on what Pierre Bourdieu would call cultural capital, leisure, education, access to nature, and of course, wealth. Odell herself asks the important question, what does it take to afford refusal? And that question reveals the class dimensions of such curated solitude. This kind of withdrawal privileges those with time and security. It risks turning resistance into an aesthetic stance, drawing the critique that it is a form of privileged disengagement, privileged chosen loneliness, if you like, because it implies a certain class status. During COVID, we saw this very clearly. It was clear who could afford to work from home, who had gardens or private space in which to relax and unwind, and whose labor remained, quote unquote, essential. Many essential workers were basically burnt out during this time. So even as Odell critiques capitalism, her model remains individual, curated, and class-coded. A point that I put into relief by contrasting such self-optimization with Bartleby's extreme refusal and the more recent example of Lee Lozano's dropout aesthetic. Lee Lozano is a famous artist who basically withdrew from the world and from the art world especially. So these are extreme examples which are not curated solitude, I'm suggesting. Before moving on from Odell, I just want to quickly offer a few extracts again to give you a sense or taste of her approach. I won't read every word, but I have emphasized in red some key phrases. So, for example, when she's talking, she recommends bird watching as a way of retreating from the world to regenerate oneself, to recreate oneself. Even in this very selective representation of Odell's arguments about resisting the attention economy, we see her nuanced approach. She suggests, for instance, that bird watching is a valuable retreat from the attention economy by turning to nature like Thoreau, whom she discusses. This is an example of withdrawing from the attention economy in order to be able to do nothing, but also thereby to become more attuned to nature. So she talks about the way when we retreat, we are able to see everyday life freshly. To become more attuned to nature, become a better listener, to repair, to listen, and also to resist. Here, acknowledging that she can be accused of speaking from what she calls a place of privilege, she nonetheless defends refusing the attention economy by citing Gilles Deleuze's point that she has the right to say nothing. That just because this right is denied to many people doesn't make it any less of a right or any less important. Basically, this is Deleuze's argument. She also insists on the right to retreat or optimize individual well-being. And implicitly differentiating herself from the neoliberal paradigm, she does acknowledge that what she is recommending is recommending is not good for business. But it can reconnect us to what she calls the unruly, indescribable detail of the real, to nature. But I want to suggest that Odell remains vulnerable to the charge of elitist withdrawal, which I am trying to take seriously, though I am generally sympathetic to Odell's program. Both Manson Model 1 and Odell Model 2 are then preeminent examples of the cultural trend in literary cultural rhetorics of self-optimization. I should note that the burgeoning of a self-indulgent or self-centered culture is not just a literary cultural phenomenon, but it is also almost a cultural meme in the general culture. A case in point being Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, a self-care empire. And the meme too has drawn criticism and even parody. And one example that I could offer is the Glop parody by Gabriel Moss. Parody, of course, attests to the significance of the phenomenon. So both therapeutic withdrawal Model 1 and elite retreat Model 2 imagine freedom as stepping outside, withdrawal from entanglement, escaping messy sociality and the burden of responsibility into a resplendent, sovereign subjecthood. But if it aims at transcendence, this attempt primes the achievement subject, Byung-Chul Han's term, Leistungssubjekt, for disappointment. He argues that this kind of approach sets you up for failure. There has been valuable critical commentary on this therapeutic or curated withdrawal. As Laurent Berlant argues in The Inconvenience of Other People, such strategies turn other people's needs into your own obstacles for your happiness. If there is no alternative to capitalist realism, in Mark Fisher's phrase, then what remains is the cynical attitude that Nietzsche describes, the acquiescence to a mindlessly historical, unquote, quote unquote, historical is a bad word for Nietzsche here, understanding of being and belonging. He calls it an enfeebled, uncritical, or unreflective practical egoism that militates against life itself. Paralyzes life itself, as he says. Wendy Brown similarly comments, Wendy Brown is, of course, the political theorist. Wendy Brown similarly comments on the economization of everyday life, a rejection of the social that looks like resistance against society, or a critique of normativity. Yet this is nothing more, as Slavoj Žižek points out, than ideology at its purest. The self-reassuring pose of critique without the risk of transformation. So we end up at best with individual transcendence and not systemic change, private peace instead of public engagement, which is another word for depoliticized, privatized withdrawal. At worst, this results in a deeper loneliness, even the kind Hannah Arendt cautioned was one origin of totalitarianism in her famous book. Even without going to this extreme, achievement society, as Byung-Chul Han points out, sets up the achievement subject for failure and depression. And other critics such as Lee Edelman, Jack Halberstam, Anne Svetkovich, and Rahel Yegi, the German philosopher, have explored very similar territory. So the next step then is to ask, how might refusal look if it were politicized rather than privatized? So here, one alternative to therapeutic and curated self-optimization is proffered in Sarah Ahmed's well-known self-positioning as a queer killjoy feminist. Her killjoy performs a queering or voluntary exit from heteronormative bourgeois positivity. As such, it offers one alternative for a more critically considered self-alienation from society, which is, however, not just a privatization of subjectivity. The feminist killjoy is someone who refuses to smooth over discomfort in unjust arrangements, but is not content to secure her own self-optimization. As you can see in these two contrasting columns here, The killjoy says no, not just to escape, but to transform unjust unjust conditions or the unjust order that she negates. And here negation is a good word. If therapeutic withdrawal operates through retreat alone, killjoy politics operates through engagement. Killjoy withdrawal is a non-sovereign, politically engaged form of withdrawal. It's always done with other people. It's not sovereign in that sense. Yet to some extent, this reproduces the politics of privilege and self-optimizing withdrawal. Not everybody can resign from prestigious teaching jobs and not work, as Ahmed has done. She's basically working as an independent scholar and she can afford to do it. Although I have to say that her principled stance is admirable. Ahmed's example prepares us to see how power's playground dramatizes refusal not as irresponsible retreat, but as shared responsibility. So I'd like to turn now, finally, to that text. Richard Powers, in his 2024 novel, Playground, gives us a community an island community, wrestling with modern isolation in a tangible landscape. Makatea Island, this is a real island, once mined coral atoll in French Polynesia. It was mined for phosphate. The land desperately needs development, financial assistance, infrastructure, connection to the wider world, especially given its geographical remoteness and colonial legacy of extraction, phosphate mining, which has scarred the landscape irreparably. In this novel, the tech billionaire Todd Keene, about whom I'll say a few more words, proposes an AI-enabled sea studying project, floating cities for the global elite, centered around this island, Makatea, promising massive investment and modernization. The islanders face a genuine dilemma. Accept promised progress or refuse participation in what may be another cycle of extraction disguised as development. Either choice carries significant cost and considerable ambivalence. There is no easy answer. The conflict isn't simply tradition versus modernity. It's between two conceptions of care. Keene's entrepreneurial rescue fantasy versus the islanders' practice of ecological responsibility. Through this lens, Powers explores whether a community can practice collective withdrawal, choosing to stay with a damaged place rather than seeking salvation or technological transcendence. Let's examine how this island consciousness operates as a form of collective refusal. So here's an actual image of the island and how it's been pockmarked by the mining history. Powers structures the narrative around four exceptionally gifted figures, his signature style. There's first Yves Beaulieu, a French-Canadian oceanographer who sees the ocean as a threatened playground ecosystem. Todd Keene, the aforementioned tech entrepreneur with terminal Lewy body dementia, who created the monetized AI platform called Playground. Rafi Young, Todd's brilliant black rival from Chicago's impoverished West Side, a literature devotee and game player, and Ina Aroita, an artist who mediates between the two friends and eventually moves to Makatea with Rafi to raise their children. What interests me isn't the individual loneliness of these figures, although Todd, Rafi, and Evie are all lonely geniuses who somewhat choose their isolation out of a sense of superiority. That is familiar Powers territory, the Lake Wobegon effect, where everyone is exceptionally gifted. More compelling here is Makatea itself as a character. This remote Pacific community endured ravaging phosphate mining during colonial occupation, leaving a pockmarked landscape and fewer than 100 remaining islanders still paying the price. Depleted resources, unemployment, poverty, lack of education, exclusion from progress and from the world community. This community sorely needs material assistance, yet they must decide whether accepting Todd's development proposal means joining in the modern world or submitting to another extraction cycle. From an entrepreneur's perspective, McAteer looks like an opportunity, which is precisely how Todd sees it. But the island consciousness resonates with Haraway's staying with the trouble, rather than seeking individual transcendence or technological escape. So Power's major figures are indeed islands unto themselves, countering John Donne's famous formulation that no man is an island. But there's a different island consciousness at work here. The recognition that the island is fundamentally a community, not atomized individuals thrown together, however gifted they may be. These islanders, with their island consciousness, practice what Haraway calls making kin, understanding life as interconnected, multi-species relationships. The novel focuses on the community's collective decision to withdraw from what appears to be their material best interest, rejecting Todd's seasteading proposal. This isn't a simple moral gesture, but performs a democratic process grounded in debate and shared risk. It remains deeply ambivalent, and ambivalence is a very important feature in Choosing Loneliness. It's a fundamental premise of my book. Every resident on the island participates in the decision, weighing short-term gain against long-term ecological responsibility. The choice to refuse development isn't romanticized. The islanders understand the cost: lost jobs, delayed infrastructure, continued precarity. But that cost becomes commitment, a declaration that relationships of care matter more than market promises. What makes their ambivalent withdrawal powerful is that it isn't enacted in isolation. It's a process of collective responsibility, a shared no that opens space for different kinds of yes. This leads us to how this collective process responds to the familiar critique that withdrawal is ultimately privileged choice. And I'm nearly at the end, so please bear with me. Island consciousness operates through 5 interconnected dimensions, as each a process rather than a static position. First, democratic deliberation as collectively chosen withdrawal. Powers shows us the whole island crowded into the community center, every resident participating in decision-making about development. This contrasts sharply with Todd Keen's assumption that he can buy individual consent. Second, it's a place-based ecological accountability as a process of remaining engaged with others and with nature. Despite their damaged landscape, the island had been strip mined down to its coral bones, Richard Powers tells us. They choose to stay with rather than fleeing from damaged relationships. This means protecting coral reefs despite economic cost, in perpetuity. So forever they will be committed to this once they reject development. Third, multi-species relationships through process of making kin as ongoing commitment. This is one more feature of this island consciousness that I'm trying to highlight. So, for example, Evelyn's deep connection with manta rays and marine ecosystems, the community's commitment to sea turtle nesting grounds, Ina's sculptures made from ocean plastic, creating beauty within damage. These are all examples of not individual practices, but shared commitments, even though the larger instance is of withdrawal. Fourth, it's a historicized self-awareness as consciousness of what has gone before. The community remembers we've been extracted from before. We know what promises look like. Their decision to withdraw, to become isolated, is informed by lived experience of phosphate extraction and a colonial legacy. Fifth, and finally, this island consciousness is a process of strategic non-relationality, a deliberate and deliberated withdrawal. So in that sense, it's democratic. The islanders choose islandness in a process of deliberation, distancing themselves from global capitalism to maintain local commitments. As Powers writes, every individual human is an island, and he emphasizes their obstinate separateness. But here, obstinate separateness becomes a collective virtue. So I want to close now by just suggesting how island consciousness might productively anticipate and address possible critiques and criticisms of my highlighting or foregrounding of the choice of loneliness, choice of withdrawal, and other forms of self-alienation. So let me pose 4 questions for us to just bear in mind as we close. First, how do we distinguish strategic collective refusal from elite withdrawal, especially when privilege shapes who can refuse? Second, can island consciousness as process remain politically effective without losing its rootedness? Can it scale? Can it translate? Can it travel? Third, how does the sustained ethical life of a community, what Hegel called Sittlichkeit, frame elective loneliness or withdrawal as a process offering resistance to extractive systems? And finally, how might the ongoing process of collective refusal help us move beyond the cruel optimism, as Lauren Berlant's, in Berlant's phrase, of individualized solutions towards forms of shared flourishing as a form of life? So these questions aren't merely theoretical questions. They ask us to consider what it might mean in our own institutions, our own communities, to stay with the trouble rather than outsource it, even if it means withdrawal from the public sphere or from the commons, or if it means turning inward away from the noisy world. So that is, again, a form of loneliness. I hope I've offered a model of choosing loneliness that isn't vulnerable to charges of elitism or irresponsibility, model of chosen self-isolation at the community level that is not vicious, but virtuous. So thank you for your attention. I welcome your questions, suggestions, and critical engagement. These ideas are very much in development, and I look forward to our conversation. Thank you. I can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, yes. Thank you.
Samir, good, wonderful. Thank you so much. You have taken us across the world and back again. Search.
Hope it wasn't too difficult to follow.
No, you've been a good tour guide. We can have questions from people. If people have the little yellow hands that you can raise on Teams, that's useful so that I can see who's asking questions now or next. If I don't recognize you, in other words, don't invite you to say something, it may be that I've missed you, so do feel free just calling out. Does anyone have a question or contribution to? I feel after every seminar the need for a certain, this is why I'm chatting away, a certain amount of time for people to collect their thoughts first. But does anyone have any questions? Thank you, Lukash.
Hi, hi, Samir. Thank you so much for your presentation. You can hear me, right?
I can see you. I can hear you too.
Okay. Because I dabble mostly in sports studies, and listening to your presentation, I immediately thought about, for example, athletes choosing isolation in order to improve themselves, improve their performance. I'm thinking of movies like Rocky, for example, when he trains on his own in order to become a better person. And I just wanted to ask you, do you think that it is isolation as conformity and accumulation, so becoming a part of, let's say, the process of production, when we want to see an athlete as an element of like a capitalist machine, let's call it like that, or is it like something more personal and something more concerned with not being a part of the community?
Thank you, Lukash. That's a very good question. In principle, I'm not even hostile to capitalist isolation, if that's what you want to call it. I mean, sometimes it's important to collect your energies, to become good at something, Malcolm Gladwell says it takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. And his approach is friendly to business. I don't think it's unfriendly. In the case of sports people, I mean, I have to say I respect that. I think that I respect a drive to become good at something, if it means sports or even business. I have to say that I feel like I have no right to object to that. So that kind of isolation, as I say, is one of the affordances that I was pointing out on the right side of my crazy graph. Uh, it's one of those affordances where withdrawal for a hermit, for example, for a religious anchorite, for a person who wants to do meditation, for a person who wants to just unwind. I think these are perfectly fine. Uh, Reculer pour mieux sauter, to withdraw in order to leap further. I don't think I have any principal objection to that. No, not at all. It's only when you refuse to care about other people that it becomes a problem. If for example you withdraw your resources, it's like taking the football home after a game, like a bully in the schoolyard. You take your toys away with you, and all these poor kids are left without anything to play with. That's an attitude that I think I would begin to feel uncomfortable with. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bear's privilege to ask you a question, Samir. In trying to understand loneliness in my research, I often end up saying that one of the characteristics of modern loneliness, particularly, is guilt or shame. And I wonder that might seem helpful when you talked about the island community. They are not luxuriously withdrawing, comfortably withdrawing. They are withdrawing knowing that they have other positive choices they could have made, to be wealthy or to be this or to be that, and that people will look at them badly. This sense of perhaps shame that's characteristic of many forms of loneliness. Similarly, Bartleby, the scrivener who you mentioned, is not a happy withdrawal. He ends up in is it a pauper's house or prison?
Yeah.
He is not comfortable, and he understands the not just the pain, but the either guilt or shame of what he's doing. Or Antigone, you mentioned the tragic figures. Is that helpful in your description of loneliness chosen, and yet it's still loneliness? It's not luxurious. The luxurious, hermetic sort of I am withdrawing to be closer to God is, one assumes, well, one would hope, would be without a sense of guilt or shame. Whereas the loneliness you are describing includes some sense of, and I know I am doing something that people do not think is right, and maybe I don't think is right either.
Yeah. Just a note, I have actually written published an essay on Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner, in which I make a distinction between shame and guilt. And I draw on the theories of shame and guilt vis-a-vis the Holocaust survivors, for example. So that essay tries to distinguish between shame and guilt as a kind of imposed loneliness on somebody, if you like. I didn't use that phrase in my article, but now that you are reminding me of it, I think of shame or guilt, which are distinct, as a kind of imposed loneliness. And with Antigone, which is the first chapter of my book, In Progress, I see Antigone as taking on loneliness, almost, as you say, against the better angels of her nature. She knows that she is risking life. She is being threatened by Creon in that tragedy. And at one point, Creon even gives her a way out, but she refuses it. She knows that she is risking death. She's going to be put into a cave and she will die there. But she goes with that anyway, because in the terms of the play, she is choosing a higher law than Creon's earthly law. In any case, the idea that she chooses her own death in order to support the higher law against Creon's degraded legal order is her ethical virtue. So I treat that as a kind of ethical choice. And so for that reason, it ends up on the right side of that crazy diagram that I referred to earlier. It's the positive kinds of chosen loneliness. So Antigone for me is an iconic figure. She is the first chapter of my book, an iconic figure of what it means to choose loneliness and the benefits or affordances. Which are not always pleasant. I mean, to be ethical is not always pleasant. In fact, it's as they say in Indian culture, it is the most difficult road. The most difficult road to God, if you want to put it that way, is also sometimes the most difficult. And so just because it is difficult is not a reason not to choose it. There are better reasons to choose it than simply your own personal comfort. I hope my talk today also kind of hinted at that those people who are choosing self-optimization are choosing comfort, if you like.
Thank you. I think I was distinguishing heroic, you might give up your life for your country or for a higher principle, a heroic choosing death and choosing loneliness, where there is some part of you thinks maybe I am doing wrong, or maybe there's the ambiguity in it.
Yes, absolutely. And as I said in my talk, in every single case that I discuss, ambiguity is front and center.
Thank you.
And in fact, I draw on Kierkegaard and Heidegger and this notion of anxiety. So for me, anxiety is always informing any choice that I look at of loneliness. And both you and Lukáš pointed out something that it's just slipped my mind, but this idea of choosing excellence, the heroic form that you are mentioning, is also the heroic form that I think Lukáš, in his own way, is highlighting. The heroic athlete is this kind of figure of excellence, the paragon of athleticism or fitness. That exceptionality is sometimes difficult, as we see in the case of some of the most important tennis players in the world. Their isolation is not always a happy place.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ross, you have your hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Ross.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was drawn to thinking about what you were saying about the self-care movement, and there's a trend among the kind of younger generation, especially now that we have a better understanding and less of a taboo around mental health, that there's become an emphasis on protecting one's own mental health. And I hear that phrase quite often, and it almost is based on a supposition that all that is external is a threat to my own mental health. So I was thinking about when you were discussing the islanders versus the external threat. How do people today actually distinguish between who is who, if that makes sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And I confess I cannot have a good answer to this, because I think that you are putting your finger on something really crucial, that in an age where everything is mediated. I mean, for me, I'm in the media studies department, if you like, English and media studies. And so for me, what media look like are this idea of mediation is something I take very seriously, that all our experience is mediated. It's not immediate. And in some ways, it's a good thing because it brings to bear your critical faculties. But because everything is mediated, we don't know the reality we don't know the external from the internal. To answer your question, I think young people have a pretty hard time distinguishing what is a real threat to their self-esteem and what is just a virtual effect of influencer culture. I mean, for example, I think everyone knows this very well, but young people, especially young women, have a really hard time thinking of themselves as being beautiful. because they are forced to live up to these totally unrealistic standards of beauty. Men too, of course, being strong, being virile, being successful. These are all problems that are so influenced by the virtual media that we don't really have a good, realistic sense of what it might mean to live a good life. And I think it's a real problem. I think it's also behind this increasing rates of suicidality, which I refer to in passing. It's a serious concern. And these people who are becoming lonely because of what they are seeing on the media, and I don't want to just blame the media. I think there's more going on. I think there's a certain also laziness, forgetting about mass media. There's also a certain laziness in myself, for example, a kind of fatigue with analysis, with criticism, with mediation. People are not reading carefully. We are, I think, the community here who are scholars are rare people, I think, because they want to take seriously ideas, abstractions. And I think there's a diminishing appetite for abstraction, for mediation. And that is a problem because it does not allow us to critically understand what is real and what is not real. So for me, that's why I'm interested in philosophy, for example. I think that all the way from Kant and his idea of the Ding an sich, the getting to the Ding an sich, has been an issue. And in contemporary philosophy, there's a sense that we don't really have a grasp of even everyday life. There are philosophers who are trying to return us to the politics of everyday life. And that would not be necessary if we were thoughtful, considerate, people. I don't know if that gets at your question, but I think it's simply a very fundamental inability to distinguish what is actual and what is fantasy. I have a book on fantasy, for example, and so I take fantasy very seriously. And fantasy by fantasy I mean something very technical. I mean psychoanalytic fantasy, starting with Jacques Lacan, going back to Freud. There's a serious. I'm seriously interested in the question of fantasy as opposed to realism. My book that I'm mentioning is called Realism and Fantasy. So anyway.
That people have. Yes,
yes.
Yevgenia, hi.
Yes, Yevgenia, I'm from Kharkiv, Ukraine, Karazin University, and it is, you see that it is a problem for us to discuss these questions. But first of all, I would like to thank you for this, for your presentation, for the fact that you have examined the problem from various angles, and it is okay. I like it very much, and it is like the fresh air for us. You know that we live in the middle of the war, and the second thing I'd like to say is that these problems of withdrawal and self-care and the problem of isolating the herself from the reality is very hard because of this bombing and the situation and so on and so forth. But I think that, so you see that individual loneliness, it can't be chosen in our situation. Especially when you should run into for shelter and seeing with a lot of people, different people that you have never seen before. And then you are to keep this individual loneliness deeply inside yourself. But I would like to say that I'm the person who is teaching literature, especially English language literature. And so I would like to say that it is important, and in the your last answer, I found that you understand it too, and I appreciate that very much, that nowadays we are coming to the different kind of literature. We are going away from this hard rock of postmodernism, and we are coming to the fact that and it is great, I think, that we are speaking about psychology. We study psychology of a person, and in the previous period, it was the thing that you have mentioned, that it was some fantasy. You say fantasy, it is like irony. Let us call it irony, total irony, and the total irony that permitted the everything around. So we can't even think about that the person is unique, that psychology is important, and psychology is decisive for one person, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to just to give a citation of Dawn, that in Hemingway's novel, you know. And this is like, I think that it is very important that reality you were speaking about comes in the middle of our literature and then of our minds, because it is I should like to say that my students got used to this ironical attitude to life. And as we see in this country, that it is not island consciousness that can save us. Island consciousness would never save us. And we see it every day and feel it. And I think that the angle of your studies, the angle of studying the inner aloneness of a person should give us the way of understanding that loneliness should be, because you should think over the very important problems of your life and the life around you. But then afterwards, you should go with this knowledge that you have just thought in the lonely hours or minutes, I don't know, but you should give it to other people, and then it should, and there should be born some ideas. And I think, what do you think? Do we have some, I don't like to speak about some progress or realism or something like that, but I think that this humanistic approach, what do you think, is we can save not only literature, but also the like human kind. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for the long speech.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Eugenia. I appreciate very much what you're saying, but may I first say that our hearts go out to you in Ukraine. I mean, it must be so difficult. It's unimaginable. I have a very bright Ukrainian student now. He's very smart, wonderful, and we work very closely together. And we were talking about in Kiev when the bombing of that factory where people were hiding in the basement. I mean, it's unimaginable. So I don't take lightly what you're saying. One thing that you said struck me especially, this idea that there's a kind of withdrawal, a kind of loneliness where you may come to grips with reality and learn something. But then you have to take the next step. I think if I understand you correctly, you have to take the next step and take it to other people so that they can also benefit from what you've learned. Is that correct? Do I understand you correctly?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So for that, there are many models. I mean, I think it cannot hurt us to go back to the model of, for example, the Buddha, which is exactly what he did. You know, he went into isolation, he meditated, he quote unquote attained enlightenment, if you believe that. But there's also the model of Jesus. You know, there's a sense in which Jesus can be seen as a person who was persecuted, who was forced to say on the cross that he had been abandoned, and in that profound passion or loneliness, I mean, that the next step for that from that point is a kind of return to humanity at large. So the idea that one withdraws in order to bring the fruits of one's, say, solitary meditations to people at large, it's a time-honored process. I mean, I think you can even find that in your Dostoevsky. You know, there's a sense in which the solitary in Dostoevsky is actually a lesson for mankind, generally speaking. You can go from Dostoevsky all the way to Solzhenitsyn with a similar kind of feeling that isolation is not just isolation for the sake of isolation, but also a kind of reflection on one's society. I don't know if that addresses your real concerns even here.
Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn, especially Solzhenitsyn, are not the persons who I'm going to read nowadays, because they are, especially Solzhenitsyn, he's chauvinist, I think, especially towards Ukraine, and it is.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't like to speak about him at all.
Sure, I understand.
So it is, maybe we are hurt. Of course, there comes the day when we are going to discuss them, but nowadays it is too hurtful, sure. And I'm not going to do this now.
Yeah, I'm sensitive to that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And the danger of self-publicity, but next year in April, we have our ISRS conference, Alone Together, the 5th conference we have, and it will be held in the USA. Details on the website. One of our speakers is Tenzin Rinpoche, a Buddhist writer and monk, who writes about and talks about withdrawal in the Buddhist tradition, so that we may be of benefit to humankind or the world. And it is precisely a withdrawal, not two things, a withdrawal and then going back to be of benefit, but a withdrawal such that you will be at one with the whole world and of benefit to the whole world. So in a very specific Buddhist way, and I'm looking forward to hearing him there. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there as well next year, if you're able to come to Georgia for that. I'll ask another question, Samir. I said the privilege of the chair, and I'm sorry, demonstrating privilege here. What you have said and what Evgenia has said as well about humanism and post-humanism of people like Donna Haraway, I think most of the debates on solitude, generally, solitude, silence, loneliness, have been about people being separate from people, or people feeling rejected by people. And yet, as you say, what about other animals? What about the rest of the world? And of course, Buddhists and Hindus have a much more subtle sense of people being merely one creature amongst many. But I wonder if you could expand on why solitude and loneliness debates are nearly always humanistic in the narrow sense of being about human beings and their relationships, and rarely about human beings' relationship beyond humanity.
Another wonderful question. I feel privileged to be hearing from you, Julian, always. I always feel that way, so you know this. But to answer your question, I think your question is its answer. You said it's a kind of narrowness to focus on humanism, and that's what I'm thinking, that we need to be educated out of that constricted universe. We need to be educated out of that to, educare means to draw somebody out of. So that idea of drawing us out of this narrowness is the point. So that's an answer hiding in your question. But to take up your challenge to expand on that. So as you say, Donna Haraway exhorts us to build kin with other species, to build multi-species kinship. But I would go even further in terms of responding to the challenge. There is a whole field of research, as you know, that tries to expand not only to living creatures or even organic life, but to things. So there's a whole field of research that turns to things as being continuous with organic life. So I'm thinking about something like Jane Bennett's Vibrant Matter. She basically is arguing for a resonance. I think this is the word she uses, a resonance between life, human life, for example, and the things among whom we live. There are people, I've even written about, this self-care routine by an interior designer who basically wants to take things seriously. And when you're parting with socks or pillowcases, you should pay respects and thank them for having served you, that kind of thing. But to go even further, there's also a philosophical tradition of speculative realism, in which you try imaginatively to go back to a point before history, before human history, and in that speculative moment, you already have a kind of expanded notion of the fact that we are just a blip, and that we need to be modest about what humanism actually might promise. And the explosion of humanism is taking place not only in philosophical traditions like Jane Bennett's return to things. There's also a whole collection of articles in the wonderful Critical Inquiry on things. Bill Brown, for example, has a whole book on things. There's also a deflation, I think, going on of humanism, not only in post-humanism, but also in the sense that humanism has not saved us. So I'm thinking of things like Frantz Fanon and his contemporary inheritors, the whole Afro-pessimism movement. I've been pretty engaged with Afro-pessimism for a while. And people like Frank Bulderson have argued that humanism cannot save us. So we need to get beyond this kind of narrow perception of humanism. I mean, that may not be welcome news to all of us, or may not be a good thing for us to hear. We may be uncomfortable with it, is what I mean. But still, there's a sense that humanism is a narrowing of our focus, and we need to think beyond that. And it's a challenge.
Thank you. Wow. Gosh, when we're close to running out of time, so we have perhaps the last question, which would be lovely if it was from you, Gotcha.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Samir, for this absolutely lovely talk, and very comprehensive and very sophisticated and just lovely. And each question also, I would like to thank for your questions, because each question brought a lot of inspirations and food for thought. My question might sound trivial, I don't know, but I was wondering, because we are very various as people. There are many introverted and extroverted people among us, and more or less shy to meet and so on. So I was wondering, how will we know that the dose of our solitude in our individual life is proper one? healthy one. It's not an escape. It's not egocentric. And how will we know? Could you try to indicate some symptoms that could show us whether we are on the proper way and not hiding from people and not choosing the wrong loneliness, the loneliness which is against community and against our spiritual improvement and development?
Gosh, far from being a trivial question, that is a daunting and enormous project that you set before me at this last moment. So at this 11th hour, all I can say is that it's a complicated story. I have a friend who calls himself an introvert, and he says that his understanding and his analyst, he has an analyst because he's such an introvert. His analyst says that actually some introverts want to be in company a lot more than some extroverts do. So an introvert is not necessarily somebody who wants to shun other people, but he or she wants to have a certain kind of feedback from other people so as to shore up this idea of his or her introversion. I don't understand it perfectly, but I'm just suggesting that, at least for me, this idea of who actually is an introvert and how do you know it? How do you know if you are in a good way an introvert or in a bad way an introvert or extrovert? I mean, I think the answer to that question is simply community. The idea that I'm thinking of somebody like Jacques Rancière, for example, in which there's a kind of distribution of the sensible, as he puts it. And I would think that the best answer I've got is, Rancière, but also Hegel, the idea that your subjectivity, I'm thinking of, for example, his idea of the master and the slave, which is a complicated relationship. It's not just a simple hierarchy, as you know, but the idea that even the subject in Hegel is not something sort of organically produced from within. It is produced in community. It is produced interpersonally, to go back to Rancière, the idea that it is the other person, the slave, who gives the master his own image as master. So the slave, the master needs the slave because he is otherwise unconscious of who he really is. The slave, on the other hand, knows that he is merely a slave, but he knows two positions. He knows the master position and he knows the slave position. The master is blind because he only knows the master position, does not see the slave, does not recognize the slave. But in this politics of recognition that I'm suggesting, the subject comes into being precisely because there is an other to look at you. Without the other, and in Hinduism, for example, or in other traditions, the reason God created the world is because he needed an audience. He needed somebody to witness that you are God even. It's in the absence of a creation, God cannot be a creator. So in the absence of another, a subject cannot be a subject. So I would say that, it's not a trivial question at all. But if you want to come down from those heights, I would think that a person knows if he or she is an introvert or extrovert in the right way is simply if he or she is happy. If he or she feels that in contact with his loved ones or her family or her friends, if she feels that she has a relationship, then she's okay. If she does not feel that she is in human community, I think that's when you know something is off, something is wrong. So that's why I take this idea of loneliness as a negative, undesirable state quite seriously. I'm not ignoring it when talking about choosing loneliness, but one chooses loneliness in the face of and at the cost of anxiety, that you could be losing your own subjectivity, that there's a kind of aphonesis of the subject in psychoanalysis when there is no recognition from another person or another being. You actually absolutely need that kind of interpersonal or intersubjectivity to be subjective, to have a subject at all. I hope that gets at your good question.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
One of the great pleasures of working in solitude studies as an area to work in is that people from education, from theology, from philosophy, from literature, from psychology, working on these topics and interlinking. One of the great joys today, Samir, is that we have all of those cross-cutting in yourself. You talk with huge insight, drawing on philosophy, on literature, on theology, on psychology, on politics, and we have talked collectively about humanism and beyond issues. To be with you, Samir, and to be with everyone here. So can I thank you on everyone's behalf, I'm sure, for what's been an amazing seminar. And if people have, as I'm sure people do have, further questions, I'm sure you would be happy to be contacted directly. You're available on the Bentley University website, or people through us, either at the ISRS or myself or Gosia individually. And I see Rafa Ivansky, our secretary, is here too. So please do let us continue this conversation. It has been so interesting. And it will be available for other people to join in online when we have the recording. We're able to. So
I'm also open to criticism. So if you have any rotten apples to throw at me, those are also welcome. But I'm genuinely interested in your insights. Thank you for your wonderful questions. I feel humbled and very pleased to be able to talk to you.
Right.
Hope to see you again.
And we have some new people here who I've not seen before. If you would like to join the ISRS, it is free as well. Then it will be easier for you to be mailed and informed about what's going on. But thank you so much, and thank you for the. I've seen some thanks in the chat as well. So cheerio, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you again at another seminar.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for many ideas to reflection. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Julian. It's always such a pleasure.